Chapter 25. Responding to their king's command, a roar went up among the soldiers outside. "We don't have much time," Savion said. "You must flee." "I have a plan," said Riona. "The Claw of the Conqueror. It's in the catacombs, right? And we can get to it from the heart of the foe fire, correct? And between us and it stands scores of angry ghosts," said Ember. "I think we've covered that part already. So we can't just walk up and grab it," Riona said. "Unless somebody can draw the ghosts away while the rest of us find the claw." "That would be me," said Cranks solemnly. The others looked at him. "I'm serious," he said, his eyes red-rimmed. "Brute force won't solve this problem. I'm smarter than the three of you combined, and I have a pack filled with little distractions. And I have an idea of something I could do, something special." He nodded at Dougal, but the human didn't know what he meant. Dougal protested. "Cranks, we've lost one person already." Cranks shook his oversized head. "I need to do this. For Golik, if no one else. I cost him his life. I don't plan on dying without giving him vengeance. He'd never forgive me if I didn't." "You need somebody to come with you," Ember said. "Your will is strong, but your legs are short." "Good idea," said Riona, nodding. "Who could be a better distraction for this group of ghosts than a char? Just the sight of you should send them into a frenzy." "I was thinking you, actually," Ember said. "You are the least important part of our team, the one we could best stand to lose." "Very well. I'll go with Cranks," said Riona. "If Ember Doomforge is too much of a coward to stand up to a bunch of Ascalonian ghosts, then I'll let her run off with her tail between her legs." "I am no coward, mouse." Ember snarled down at Riona, and Dougal wondered if the char might end the argument by tearing out Riona's throat. "Prove it. I've seen kittens less skittish than you." Ember grumbled at her. "Fine. If Cranks is determined to play the decoy, then I will join him. I wouldn't leave him with you in any event. We'll keep them occupied for as long as we can," said Ember. "You just move like the wind. The longer we must keep them chasing us, the more likely they'll catch us." Dougal held out his hand to Ember and then Cranks, shaking each one of them. "Thank you," he said. "Don't worry about us," Cranks said with a somber wink. "I'm not quite out of tricks yet." "This isn't farewell," Ember's fur bristled as she spoke. "We shall toast to our foes' failures tonight." Ember and Cranks moved to the doorway and down a long staircase. On their appearance, the king let out a rumbling shout, and in response, the ghostly hordes poured from every doorway. They crowded and milled in the courtyard below, and then, as if propelled by a cannon, shot up the staircase towards them. Ember picked up Cranks, and with a bellow of her own, charged down the stairs. Dougal could not bear to look, but halfway down the stairs, the char took a sharp left off the stairs themselves. The pair, Char and Azura, landed on a rotted roof, not less than 10 feet below them. Slate tiles shot out from beneath Ember's feet, but she kept her footing and jumped again, landing on a lower roof, and repeated the action once more. Ember landed on the edge of an avalanche of masonry. She held her feet out before her, stiff and wide, and when she hit the stones, she did not tumble and fall. Instead, she kept her feet and slid down the shattered tumble of stone, straight toward the street below. Cranks screeched the whole way down. The ghosts followed them, those on the stairs streaming over the railings and into the city itself, those at the bottom changing directions and surging after the fleeing pair. Dougal watched the ghostly pursuers disappear down the streets. "You should go now," said Savion. "They cannot keep them busy for long." Riona led, and Dougal followed. Ahead of them, the staircase was clear, and near the base of the stairs, visible in the overcast daylight, was the pit that caged the foe fire's heart. Yet, Dougal felt that something was watching him, and, despite himself, turned and looked up at the parapets above the royal chamber. And there stood the last king of Ascalon. Adalbern had been middle-aged when he had died, but he seemed as fit and trim as any soldier half his age. He wore a suit of armor that Dougal suspected would have sparkled had it been real and not some strange, ghostly abstraction. His head was bare, and his white hair fluttered in the wind that whipped through the crumbling battlements. His piercing eyes glared down at Dougal, and a snarl curled on his lips. Adalbern raised his fist over his head, and then swung it down to point a pale finger at Dougal. "How dare you trespass in my kingdom, thief?" the king said, his voice strong and full of fury. "For this, you shall pay the ultimate price." Dougal knew that if they fled, Adalbern would just send more ghosts after him, and their whole plan would be destroyed. He needed to play for time. He dropped to one knee and hoped that Savion's story was true. "No, your majesty," Dougal said. "I am Ascalonian by heritage. I have come to seek your blessing." The strange request took Adalbern back in an instant, but his fury resurged. "The only thing of which I shall approve is your death." "But your majesty," he said, "I come here on behalf of your son, Prince Rurik." This blatant lie brought the ghost up short. He stammered for a moment, suddenly distracted. "Rurik? My son?" For a moment his face softened, and then it grew dark again. "Rurik is dead. To me, he died the moment he left Ascalon." "Your son is dead as you are." This voice came from atop the battlements. The king turned to see the source, and his face grew livid. "Savion," he said, "you worthless wretch. How dare you enter my presence without my bidding? No, sire. These people are here to repair the damage that you've done. I won't let you hurt them. Stand aside and let me slay this foul beast now, Savion. In honor of your years of service, I will give you one last chance. Years? Savion threw up his hands. Try centuries. You killed me, and you still consider me to be in your service. Well, no more. The courier stared at his king and spoke in short, cold phrases. I renounce my position in your court. There's nothing more you can take from me, Adalbern. You cannot hurt me. So you think... Adalbern reached forward and pulled the ghostly dagger from the courier's chest, and the Mad King stepped forward and swung his blade at Savion. The ghostly servant did not move to avoid the blow, and the blade sliced through him, cutting him cleanly in two. Dougal waited for Savion to reform like the ghosts that Ember had battled in the cave near the dragon brand. Instead, the two halves of Savion separated from each other and slid apart. His legs fell one way, while his chest fell another. Before he faded away entirely, Savion said one last word, his voice brimming with grim relief. Finally, then he disappeared, blowing away into the breeze, atop the battlements like a half-remembered dream. Adalbern turned away from the vanished shards of his former servant, but found the staircase empty. Riona and Dougal were already lost among the shadowed buildings below. Behind them, the human heard Adalbern's cry of frustration over the rooftops. I think we got under his skin, said Riona, hugging a wall. You think Savion's really gone? Asked Dougal. Riona shrugged her shoulders. I don't think it matters what happens to Savion, Ember, or Crank. What matters is we find the claw of Connor. Dougal grimaced at her, then craned his neck to get a better look at the top of the tower again. All right, he said. You're right. I know you're right, but I don't have to like it. Let's move. Dougal sprinted through the town as fast as he could. Riona lagged behind him just a bit, but he could hear her behind him every step of the way. Soon they reached the main square, and Dougal skidded to a halt. The carnage sprawled out before him, stole his breath. From one side of the square to the other, the remnants sat piled up as if tossed into some careless giant abattoir. Bones and weapons and armor stacked up upon each other like kindling for a monstrous fire. Most of the bodies, especially the ones nearest to and even inside the shattered gates, had once been part of the Char invading force. At a curving line that met roughly near a well in the center of the square, the Char corpses mingled with those of the force of human warriors once arrayed against them. The two sides overlapped for several yards, a stark example of the uncertainty and chaos of battle. Dougal and Riona picked their way across the square, trying not to disturb the dead. At first, Dougal tried to avoid stepping on any remains as to show respect for those who had fallen here. That soon proved impossible, so he switched to treading gently on the bones that he could not avoid. Then a horrible howl from Ember rang throughout Ascalon city, followed by an explosion, and Dougal gave up and just charged as fast as he could without slipping on the remains scattered across the square. They were near the far side of the square when the Char appeared, still carrying the struggling Azura. Ember's mouth was rimmed with a lathering froth, and the Azura was pulling things out of his rapidly diminishing pack and tossing them back at howling, hungry ghosts. There was a brilliant flash behind him, and the side of the old archive wall slowly collapsed into the street, burying the ghosts beneath it. A cloud of dust arose from the crash, and the ghosts slowly pulled themselves from the wreckage. Ember noticed the two humans, and she stood tall and snapped a salute to Dougal. She panted from the exertion, but seemed otherwise unharmed. Get out of here, Riona said. You're supposed to lure them away. Hold it, Crank said as Ember turned to sprint away. That's it. The Char froze, and the Azura leaped down from her back to pluck a bleached Char skull from the top of the mound of bones that filled the distant pair of the square. Yes, the Azura said, grinning into the skull's empty eye sockets. Proximity to the heart of the foe fire. Good solidity. Should have enough necromantic residue to tune. This should do nicely. He pulled from his pocket the device that looked like a cross between a violin and a crossbow. Not bothering to acknowledge the others again, Ember scooped Cranks up and raced away from them with the Azura in her arms. The reforming ghosts, now clear of the collapsed building, howled after them. Dougal and Riona crouched at the far end of the square. After the last of the ghosts spiraled out of view, chasing the Char and the Azura, they let out a held breath. All right, said Riona. Now we need to get... That was the moment that three ghosts wafted out of the surrounding room, descended on her. These were dressed in ancient Ascalonian armor and keened and wailed as they attacked. For Dougal, it was all too familiar. Vala, shouted Dougal, slicing his sword through the nearest ghost. It let out a scream and dissipated, struck to the heart by the ebon blade. I'll get them. Another blow, and he chopped the ghost through the eyes, popped like a soap bubble. The third ghost turned from its attack on Riona and leapt at Dougal, too fast for him to repose. The spirit passed through him, and he could feel his heart freeze with its passage. He spun as it emerged from the far side and snapped loose with his sword. It caught the ghost immediately, and before it could even scream, it was gone. Riona staggered to her feet, her face waned from the chilling touch of the ghosts. "We need to go," said Dougal, "before any other ghosts find us." "Too late," said Riona, and looked over at Dougal's shoulder, at the bone-strewn square they had just crossed. The square was now filled with ghosts, soldiers, citizens, men and women, children. They watched the pair silently, with eyes wide with curiosity and madness. "What are they waiting for?" asked Dougal, but he immediately had his answer. On the opposite side of the square, atop the shards of the collapsed tower, Adalbert appeared in full armor and bearing the ghostly remains of Magdair, his double-bladed sword. "You have invaded my kingdom and threatened my people," said Adalbert, his long hair blown back by unseen breezes. "You are traitors to Ascalon and to humanity. I have found you guilty. The verdict is death. Subjects, carry out the..." Adalbert did not finish his sentence, for the ground beneath their feet began to hum and shake. Slowly, one of the bones pulled loose from the others and arced out over the nearby buildings to the east. Then another leg bone, this one belonging to a char. Then a skull. All of them were suddenly magnetic, pulled by some unseen force towards the east. The air was soon filled with the shards of bone, daggers, clubs of skeletal remains, forming a broad gray-white river. "What is this?" shouted Adalbert. "What sorcery is this?" "Pranks," said Dougal, kneeling down next to Riona, in the shade of the toppled pillars safe from the blows. "He said he had one more trick. He must have gotten the golem's eye to work again." The ghosts themselves were confused as the bones sailed through them, leaving ripples in their spiritual form. Then one, then another, turned and stared to chase the airborne rainbow of remains. These may have been their own bones in life, and perhaps they were incensed that they were being disturbed. "Halt!" shouted the king at his deserting followers. "I said halt! Kill these interlopers, and then we will deal with the sorcerer." There was a huge thrumping noise, as if a building filled with kettle drums collapsing, and Adalbert, the ghostly king of Ascalon, the sorcerer king, who had struck fear into the hearts of the char, turned, his face contorted in shock and awe. Above the line of buildings behind him arose a titanic figure, humanoid at the top and serpentine at the bottom, made entirely of bones and bone fragments. It was the same shape as the tomb guardian Dougal and the others had fled, the defender of Bloom's tomb, except it was made of every bone in Ascalon city, and at the back of its neck rode a small figure with a large head, gripping the bones like a rider holding on to his saddle. In the other hand, he held his misshapen hat and beat the side of the creature with it. "I got it to work!" Dougal could hear the Azura's thin voice from the height. "Praise the alchemy! I built myself a city guardian!" "Destroy it!" shouted Adalbert. "Destroy the abomination!" Now another serpent appeared, this one a thin blue one that snaked around the torso of the city guardian. This one was made entirely of ghosts, each crawling on the backs of others as it spiraled outwards, trying to reach the small Azura. "Kill the little monster," shouted the ghost king. "Kill it and take its power." Cranks apparently noticed the ghost trying to climb the creature's form and kicked his great mount hard. The serpent-bodied city guardian lurched to the left, collapsing buildings on its way and scraping off hordes of ghosts. More spirits rose in their place, and Dougal could hear the king laugh. "You will join my kingdom," exhorted Adalbert. "You and all the world of the living. I shall take you, and you will join my generals, and we will march on your cities and sweep them all from our path." "It'll be a cold day in Radissoum," snapped Crank, and the city guardian got taller now, reaching up to the overcast clouds. "I will command your power," bellowed Adalbert, ghostly spittle flying from his lips. "I'll give you your wish," answered Crank, his eyes as mad as the ghost. "This is for Golok. I will send you and your minions back beneath the earth." And with that, the city guardian, made of all the mortal remains of the ghosts of Ascalon, lunged forward like an arcing cobra, its huge head and massive arms before it, as it descended right into Adalbert and his spire. "Command this, Uka," shouted Cranks. The late king barely had time to scream, and then the centuries-old remains of Ascalon city cascaded down onto the king in a tidal wave of bone. The ossified skeletons turned to dust as they hit. They were relentless and eternal. The rest of its body followed, pouring ton upon ton of disintegrating legs, arms, and skulls onto the king's basin. It went on for what seemed to be several long minutes, and then it stopped. A huge fog bank of dust and death hung over the city, and there was no sign of ghosts, kings, or Azura.